Hello everyone and welcome to an incredible game from round 5 of this year's GRENKE Freestyle Chess Open Tournament. It is Magnus Carlsen versus Israeli Grandmaster Viktor Mikhalevski. And Viktor is playing amazing chess. He started off with 2 wins, then he faced a very strong Grandmaster Grigori Oparin, who he defeated in round 3, and then in round 4 he defeated Super Grandmaster Jordan Van Forest. And now, as we usually say, when you do well in chess, the reward is facing Magnus Carlsen. So the two of them are two of the 4 people who are on 100% going into round 5, and of course not easy facing Magnus with black, but he beat everyone, so he will try to beat Magnus as well. And this game, probably I will put it something of the sort in the thumbnail, features not 1 queen sacrifice but 2 queen sacrifices. And well, you guys will be the judge of well, how needed those queen sacrifices were, because there are opinions on this. And also I have a very cool video that I want to share with you, but I'm gonna share it with you after we check out the game, if I remember. So let's check it out, and also check out the position on the board. It looks very familiar, almost as if we're playing normal chess. So look at this. The only thing that's not in the right place is the king and queen and the rook and knight. Even our good friend the light square bishop is on c1. So if you shifted king and queen and rook and knight, we would have regular chess. And it's interesting. Maybe you could apply some theory here. Maybe you could pull off some sort of an Evans Gambit or something, because the left side of the board is normal. And I tweeted this when I saw the position right from the start. Former world champion Vladimir Kramnik retweeted my tweet saying that they were actually discussing something similar, not quite like this, but if, let's say, the knight and rook were switched, what kind of ideas maybe you could apply, and what's so different about in certain openings, maybe the knight can come to f3, but the knight can come to g3. So it's as if maybe, the knight wasn't g1 all along. Maybe you played knight e2 to g3. Okay, so it could be the same position, only with a loss of a tempo. Very interesting stuff happening. But yeah, let's see how it went. Magnus opened with pawn to e4. Sounds odd when I said, as there's a queen on e1, but okay, pawn to e5, we have bishop to c4, bishop to c5, and here I think Magnus already tried to trick Viktor. He played pawn to d3, hoping that Viktor continues in a symmetrical fashion, but pawn to d3 here, you could easily fall victim to bishop to g5 check, because there's just no knight on g8 to block the check with, as there usually is. And you cannot play f6 because the rook on g8 hangs. You cannot block with anything. You have to play king to d7, and already, I mean, that's a very weird position to have. So after a pawn to d3, we have queen to e7 by Viktor, knight to c3, and pawn to c6, with ideas of d5 in the future, or, just keep it casual with pawn to d6, knight g3 by Magnus, we have pawn to d6 and bishop to e3, challenging the bishop on c5, we have castles kingside by Viktor, and the bishop captures on c5. Magnus ruins Viktor's pawn structure somewhat, d captures on c5, and now pawn to a4. Magnus prevents pawn to b5, and okay, Viktor has a double c pawn, but he has immense control over that d4 square. We have knight g6 by Viktor, queen to e3. Magnus tries to put some pressure on that c5 pawn, and bishop to e6 offers a trade of light square bishops, which Magnus goes for. We have bishop captures, and now not queen captures, as the queen is stuck for the moment guarding the c5 pawn, so f captures on e6, doubling up the e pawn as well. So okay, you could say that it's, not that terrible. You do have a very nice control over the central squares. You just don't have control over c4 and e4. We have pawn to f3 by Magnus, strengthening the position here, preparing to remaneuver the knight to g3. The knight will come to f1 to d2, and then depending on what Viktor plays, to b3 or c4. We have knight to a6, knight to f1, and pawn to c4. Viktor sacrifices a pawn to go after Magnus's king. We have d captures on c4, and rook a to d8 with check, knight to d2, and queen to b4. putting pressure on that b2 pawn. And here I thought, okay, Magnus just castles queenside, and that's perfectly fine. But Magnus actually played king to c1. Now, castles is only the second top move recommended by the engine. King to c1 is the top move recommended by the engine. Magnus figures this out as he wants to play rook to a3 and then at some point rook to b3 to chase away the black queen. Knight c5, we have pawn to g3 controlling the knight on g6 and rook to d7. Victor now prepares to double up on the d file. Rook to d1 by Magnus and rook f to d8. And now, well, you could maybe, you know, play some other moves. Magnus goes for rook to a3, which is the top move recommended by the engine. So Magnus just playing very, very precise chess and not giving Victor any chances. We have pawn to a5 and now knight to b3. The doubled rooks are nice, but with the knight on c3 guarding the rook on d1, there's just not all that much you can do. And the position is fairly equal. The best way for Victor to continue would be either to trade on d1, or you can even just play knight captures on b3 as the rooks will get traded off. For example, rook captures on b3, you will capture on d1. After knight captures, you can even play queen captures on a4, and then something like rook to d3, also one of the reasons why Magnus played rook from a1 to a3. And you don't have to worry about queen a1 check. You can go to d2. The knight also guards the b2 pawn. And if rook captures on d3, you're going to play queen captures. And after, let's say, queen b4, okay, the game continues. Maybe you can push some pawns. A nice position for both of them. The knight can maybe come to f8, to d7, to c5, a4. I mean, it's a nice position for both white and black. So after knight to b3, that is definitely an option. Rook captures on d1 right away is an option. But no, Victor plays queen captures on c3. He removes the defender of the rook on d1, and Magnus could already make a terrible mistake here by capturing the queen with the queen. Then rook captures on d1 is checkmate, so obviously he will not do that. He plays b captures on c3, frees up the b2 square for the white king, and now rook captures on d1 with check. King to b2 and knight captures on b3. Okay, rook captures on b3 by Magnus. Also, you don't want to play c captures on b3, then rook d2 check, and the king has nowhere to go. You have to give the queen back. Another interesting way of recapturing is queen b6. It looks like it's not really doing anything because the rook is defended and you can play knight to c1, but after rook to a1, white's position is just much better. You can make it sort of weird by playing knight d3 check, and then after c captures rook d2 check, and after king b3 something like rook captures on d3, but there's nothing for those rooks to actually do there. I mean, you're just gonna queen captures on b7, and I don't know. It's a position, but not much for those rooks to do there. So instead, after knight captures on b3, Magnus just captured the old-fashioned way. Rook captures on b3, rook to h1, and now pawn to c5. Preventing the b pawn from being pushed forward. We have rook captures on h2, and now rook captures on b7. We have rook d to d2 going after the c2 pawn. Now, there's no way for Magnus to actually defend the c2 pawn, but there's also no need for Magnus to defend the c2 pawn, so he just goes for the c6 pawn. We have rook captures on c2, king to b3, and pawn to h6 now, creating some breathing room for that black king. We have rook captures on c6, creating a pass pawn on the c file, and rook to b2 check. King to c4 and rook b to e2 going after the white queen. And Magnus could now play something like queen to d3. Then, okay, you continue harassing the queen. Then, let's say queen comes to b1. Then you further harass the queen with rook to b2. Then queen comes to f1. Then rook b to f2. And, okay, you continue harassing the white queen until you somehow figure out how to get to b3. And maybe you find your way out. However, Magnus says, I'm not playing that. I don't actually need a queen here. I'm just going to sacrifice the queen right back. Queen captures on e2. And now, look at this. Rook captures on e2 and rook captures on e6. Magnus is actually down a full piece. But he is up 3 pawns. And he will also collect on e5. And he will collect on a5. So, or maybe he doesn't even need the e5 pawn, but, you know, he might capture it. So it's very hard for the knight and rook to actually do anything against Magnus's pawns. He also has an active king, the black king, no real way of entering the game. Not an easy position. Also, the knight is hanging. While you could play king to f7, and it's definitely the first move you look at, you develop the king, you defend the knight. Here Magnus would even give up the rook, and after captures and captures pawn to c6, there is no stopping the rook. That's the problem. There's just no way for the rook. You go b2 or d2, pawn to c7, and of course there's no rook b8. So that was Magnus's idea. So knight to f8 displayed. Now Magnus just captures on e5, king f7, and pawn to c6. Starts marching this pawn. Pawn to c6 is the only winning move for Magnus, but not a terribly difficult one to spot. He will now advance the c pawn, and also he will capture on a5, which will create a pass a pawn as well, and he will be just up 4 pawns, which is more than enough to compensate for a knight. Plus you have an active position. This is again, I would say playing with your food. There was no need for Magnus to give the queen back. He just did it because he can. We have knight to e6, rook captures on a5, grabbing yet another pawn, king to e7, and now rook back to d5, cutting off the black king. We have rook to e3 going after the kingside pawns, and rook to d7 with check. King e8 to prevent c7, so as the rook would hang, pawn to a5. The a pawn is unstoppable, rook captures on f3, pawn to a6, and here knight to d8. This is one last attempt of maybe keeping the game going, but okay, Mikhalevski played it with 6 seconds on the clock. There's really not much to do there. He's down to 36 seconds. The idea was, I guess, after a7 he would capture on c6, and once Magnus brings the queen into the game, king captures on d7, and then okay, he still has a knight and the rook versus a queen. They say when there's a knight there's a way. Against Magnus, less so, but it's never impossible. However, after knight to d8, Magnus just played rook captures on d8 with check, and he was in this position on move 38 that Viktor Mikhalevski resigned the game, as there is nothing more to be done here. Once you capture it, pawn to a7, and there is no stopping this pawn. There's no rook a3. There's nothing here. You cannot play rook f8 as the king is in the way, so you just resign. Once that king moves or whatever you play, this pawn becomes a queen, and it's an easy win for Magnus. So really weird game where I guess yeah, you're on 4 out of 4. You're already defeated 2 strong grandmasters. Now you face Magnus in round 5 with the black pieces, and you either go down fighting, or you become a hero by playing queen captures on c3. I mean, imagine if he won the game against Magnus. He goes on 5 out of 5 with queen captures on c3. The man is a legend. Definitely a nice attempt, but against Magnus, if it doesn't work, it just will not work. That's how it works. And before I forget, here's the fun video I promised. Let me just load it up real quickly. If you haven't seen it, you guys will really enjoy it. Let me just load it up. There we go. There's Hans and there's Magnus, and the almost collision. Very nice. You can see we can check it out one more time, because you can see that it's as if they were playing chicken. Who will move the shoulder first, and in the end Magnus moved the shoulder first. I think Hans was ready to just ram at Magnus. Let's see that one more time. I mean, it was really close. I think Magnus dodged in the exactly in the last moment. He didn't want to cause a scene. Plus he had a nice position. Yeah, there we have it. Yeah, it was almost, Magnus moved it just enough not to graze Hans. So it was a very interesting moment. I think this is the closest the two were, one to another since the great incident. So yeah, this is what happened in round 5. Magnus is now the only player on 5 out of 5. We have a couple of other, I think 4 people on 4.5. And Hans, for example, is on 4 points. So if he wants to have a chance at Magnus, he will have to win at least one more game. But yeah, 4 more rounds in the tournament. We'll see how it goes. Magnus, for the moment, the only one on 5 out of 5, undefeated. He doesn't care where the pieces are. He just comes, he conquers. He is Magnus. So yeah, hope you guys enjoyed it. I would like to thank Charles Benjamin Flynn, Diane Schwartz, Ilya Maltsev, Mohammed Babar Khalil, and the Animated Chemist for a contribution to my channel. Thank you a lot. I really appreciate it. As usual, you can check 2 of my previous videos here. Thank you for watching, and I will see you soon, continuing to check up on your wonderful suggestions and whatever else happens in the chess world. Thank you all. I will see you soon, and have an excellent rest of your day.